Welcome to the first iteration of the Heroscape Modern Power Rankings, the continuation of OEAO's Classic Power Rankings, which itself was a continuation of the older power rankings maintained by Spider Poison and Jexit. OEAO, Mike, recently handed off the reins of the power rankings to me, and I'm excited to be the next daisy in this particular chain. If you're unfamiliar with power rankings, they are a tiered system for ranking units based on the power level of their abilities proportional to their cost in points. Rankings combine a mix of theoretical assumptions, Heroscape, and analysis of results from real tournaments. The goal of rankings is to be an aid in army construction and to be a fun point of discussion and debate. In this video, I'm going to go through my methodology for ranking units, the structural changes that I've made to the rankings as part of this initial update, and then slotting in the newest units, those from the August 2025 release, that had not yet made their way into the classic power rankings. So, without further ado, let's jump on into it. There's a little bit of a change in the methodology that I'm going to be using to doing rankings than what was used previously. For non-filler units, i.e. units whose point value is 40 or more, I'm going to be ranking them based on what I perceive to be the ranking of the strongest army that wants to include that unit. This is a change from before, where some units were ranked a tier or two higher than other units that would be included in the same strongest army build. For example, Muburxa was an A before, while Roman Legionnaires and Death Chasers were both A-, because the value that Muburxa provided to that build was bigger relative to his points than the value that Romans provided. Instead, I'll now have Muburxa in the same tier as Romans, because the best build that either of them can be in includes the other one. Another example of this in my rankings is Nerak staying in the A tier instead of falling into the A- tier, because he's simply part of the best heavies build, which I view as an A army, regardless of whether you perceive his particular 50 points worth of contribution to be slightly less than, say, the 120 points that Grimnak is contributing for his value or not. For filler units, those units whose point value is less than 40, I'm going to be doing rankings purely based on what I perceive as the value per the points for that unit. If I didn't make this exception, then a ton of filler units just automatically become A+ tier because there are some point totals where they might get included in the best Q9 Raylan Rats build, for example. So I felt like this exception was necessary to make for filler units. I also think having filler units being in different tiers is just more helpful than having them all clumped together would be. An example in my rankings is Isamu being at A+ and Marku being at A. Essentially, I think that Isamu provides more value per points than Marku does, which is why I have Isamu a tier higher than Marku and up in A+. Frankly, I expect the inclusion of Isamu to be in the A+ tier to be a little bit polarizing, but that's where I view his value per points to be, and so that's where I think he fits in best. Moving into the structural changes that I've made, the biggest thing I think you'll notice with my take on the rankings is that most units are ranked quite lower than they were previously. That's because I've added an entirely new tier, the F tier, and shifted about 2 tiers worth of units down into it, which essentially opens up 2 new tiers in the middle of the rankings to be able to add increased granularity there. While it's a little more nuanced, you can sort of think of this as the previous A- through B- tiers expanding from 4 buckets into 5 to 6 new buckets. After the addition, B- is now the middle of the rankings, with 5 tiers of units above it and 5 more below it, and currently holds the highest number of units for any one tier, though that isn't necessarily a goal by itself. I've written out some vague tier descriptions, which aren't meant to be exact per se, but instead to give a rough idea about what I think about the units found in each tier. These may get more detailed and precise over time or abandoned entirely, I'm unsure yet, but it's something that I wanted to try out and get feedback on. Let's take a look at the top 4 tiers to see some examples of what this expansion entailed. Some units drop from A to A-, like Stingers and Muburxa. a lot of units drop from A- to B+, like Skahen, Alistair, and Cyprian. A lot of mainstays from the previous B+ tier fall down to B, such as Cutters and Hounds. Jumping to the far end of the rankings, the new F tier contains far more units than the previous lowest tier of D, which had 2 units, and F now contains 12. Frankly, all 12 of these units really suck and are essentially useless, and the degree to which they are useless really just doesn't matter that much. Certainly not compared to more valuable distinctions that can be made by the additional separation that was created at the higher and middle end of the rankings. I'm curious to see how this will be received. A ton of units get technically bumped down, which can have an effect on events that run as, for example, B and under, though those units can realistically just rebrand as B- and under, and achieve a similar effect. And this will force some change in how people think about what is a B+ unit, as that definition has shifted. But I think that the increased granularity is worth those shorter-term effects, especially given that we will continue to get more and more units from Renegade that will need to find a new home in one of these tier buckets. With all of the higher level stuff out of the way, let's take a look at where all of the new units from the August 2025 release slot into these rankings. By the way, units that have changed in the most recent update or been added for the first time will be highlighted in this Google Sheet until the next update. The highest ranked unit from this release is Scavarith, Lord of Ruin, who is debuting at a B+. In terms of ranking the Icenics, I also have Iron Lich at B+, with the Wraith Riders at B and Hellforge at B-. Essentially, I see Lich and Scav as the core of a B+ army that sometimes wants to include the Wraith Riders, and Hellforge being part of an alternative but slightly weaker Icenic build. Some of those beliefs could definitely change in the future, but that's how I currently see it, with Lich and Scav being uniquely capable of deleting a given unit from the map at any point via the double injection turn. I have Revenant Acolytes debuting as a B unit, which might come as a surprise, but I think they provide a lot of value to the Icenics as a 1x addition at the right point totals, and that it's probably their best army currently. I've seen them run with Lich, Scav, and Wraith Riders, and it works reasonably well, though that army as a whole is definitely susceptible to common spam, as it's more designed to kill heroes, but it can do that with the best of them. I have 2 units slotting in at B-, the first of which is Raylan the Kyrie Warrior, BT, or GC, or 4.0, or however you want to refer to her. This Raylan is still a bit of an enigma to me, as I'm very unsure what the best army that contains her is. I definitely think she can be a valuable piece in the right build, though I think it requires having an order marker on her a lot that's a mixture of the 3 or the X, which is a bit of a downside, given that the other Raylans don't typically need mid-game order markers nearly as often. I could see this ranking rising in the future, though if someone finds a better use for her in a bring one or cheese-like format, though. The other unit debuting at B- is the Tanuki Tricksters. I struggled with where to rank these guys too, mainly because they don't really have any good comps in Classicscape. Maxing out at 2 non-premium attacks per turn is a big downside, but their movement powers, both their own movement and moving others, are both quite strong. I feel like they're clearly weaker than many of the B-tier squads, like Micros, Hounds, and Mohegans, but I'm not sure if they fit better in B- or C+, but I went with B- for now. I then have 3 units clocking in at a C ranking. The first is Decker the Burrow Breaker, and I think he needs to be ranked below Tanukis, because usually just having more Tanukis and taking order markers on them is going to end up being better than using Decker, but he does have some efficient niche usages, mainly the threat of his special attack. But in order to meaningfully threaten it, you have to be willing to take order markers on him and not Tanukis mid-game, which can really backfire. Next up at C is Grave Grim. I suspect his ranking will rise as Renegade releases more units that he can move, but for now, there just aren't a ton of them for him to build with to find a good best army, and so I've slotted him here for now. The last new C unit is the Molten Crustaceans. I feel like the fact that they are a cheap common squad with decent stats is enough to keep them above the C- tier, but I also feel like they're a step behind the squads found in C+, such as the Tagawa Samurai Archers and Anubian Wolves, who have way more upside in the right situation than Lava Crabs do, and so I ended up putting them between those slots at a C. Lastly, we have one C- unit, Imperator Kane. Kane, much like Zed Nesbit, will likely receive a bonding squad in the future, which would help them both out tremendously. But for now, they're just very overpriced standalone heroes, and deserve to be in the same tier as other overpriced standalone heroes, such as the Greater Ice Elemental and Sir Dupuy. That's it. That's my alteration to the ranking structure and my initial update. I look forward to reading discussion and debate about these, as it's cool to see all of the creative uses that people can come up with for new units. Look for the next update on October 6th, when the next wave of units becomes legal. Until then, peace, y'all.